Hello, good morning. How are you? I'm Carrie Pemberton Ford and the founder of One Boat. And those of you who've been following One Boat Chaplaincy for COVID times will have been following our journey into creating links across the world, bringing reflections Monday, Wednesday, Friday, from mainly, to be honest, probably Anglican ministers working globally, but also people from other faith groups, people from no explicit religious faith at all, but deeply committed to living as fully rounded human beings concerned for their neighbours. And so if you're fresh to One Boat, I welcome you. It's 1 year in since the Pope, in his Urbis et Orbis speech into an empty St. Peter's Piazza, said, with the global pandemic that is arriving, we are all in one boat. And that's the inspiration for this Facebook live, weekly, every other day during the week, live broadcast, all recorded. And on a Friday, you can catch me interviewing the most incredible people from around the world, doing work to try and make their environments, their communities safer, healthier, more flourishing spaces in the midst of the COVID pandemic. So welcome. So how are you? And if we're infected with what's been referred to as toxic positivity, you might always go, well, I'm fine, I'm good, thanks, how are you doing? And of course, that was probably a perfectly all right response in pre-COVID times, although many of us will mask what's really going on and don't take that positive stroke of how are you as one that's really inquiring into our well-being, so that we're free to say, well, actually, I'm not so good, or I'm suffering, or I'm sad, or indeed, hey, I'm languishing. That's probably not a term that you use very much, but it's going to become, I think, more of a thing, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere, as the psychologists get out and about and start talking about what's happening to us in the light of having endured in the Northern Hemisphere what many of us hope, because vaccination now is hitting such good percentages in our communities, well, at least some of our communities. America and Britain have got high percentages now, just moving towards the 50% of people who are being vaccinated. So we can say, well, we think that, the real pressure is off, but we're still not flourishing, right? Because we've had a full year of really just grinding through the challenge of what COVID has meant for our community, families, for ourselves, for our work lives, for our social lives. And so we may come back and go, well, I'm languishing. I'm going to get back to that term, languishing. It was a term that was coined by Corrie Keyes a few years ago and has now been fastened onto as a term that we might want to reflect on a bit. I think it might be helpful. Just to note, if I was in Delhi at the moment, as our brothers and sisters are, or in Mumbai at the moment, as our brothers and sisters are, I wouldn't be saying I'm languishing. I'm probably be saying I'm terrified, I'm in panic, or I'm grieving for some of the many thousands who are losing their lives at the moment in India, in that section of India, where in Delhi and in Mumbai cases are rocketing. It's like we're at the beginning of the pandemic, not as much of the Northern Hemisphere is now experiencing, hoping that we're coming to the end of the wave of the pandemic. We are global citizens. We belong to one another, and the pain that is being experienced in India at the moment, quite rightly, the US, the UK, Europe, and some other countries are now stepping in and saying, brothers and sisters in India, here is some of the stuff that we've taken from you in the last few months, the vaccine stuff, oxygen, capabilities, capacities to respond to this recent terrifying outbreak. I think if I asked one of my brothers in Mumbai at the moment, how are you doing? That's the response. Certainly it's what's come through on my Facebook feed from friends out there. And so as we do any reflection, let's keep in mind that we are all connected. And this conversation on languishing that I'm just about to have is very particular to a certain condition that is actually one that is so much better than many are now experiencing down in the South Americas, in India, and the connected zones around India, their sister nations, Bangladesh, Pakistan, will be really concerned as to what's happening in India at present. But for a moment, let us just step aside and look at languishing, shall we, for a moment? Because how are you? I'm well? Flourishing? I don't think so. Not many of us will be in that flourishing state. Flourishing requires a whole beautiful mixture of social interaction, ease, freedom, ability to really experience the fullness of life that, so many of us just took for granted, right? Before COVID, we just thought, that's how it is to be human. It's our entitlement. It's, that's the world that we experience and is there for everybody. Well, no. COVID has taught us that is something else is pertaining, right? To make us, enable us to fully flourish. We need each other. We deeply need each other. And, for those of us who carry a faith, we would say, and we've so frequently failed to recognise, we need the goodness and the love and the warmth of God's encompassing love to fully flourish, so that we don't keep racing around trying to fill that gap, which Augustine called the gap that is in our hearts, until we find that the nourishing love of God deep inside of us as the thing that really is what fullness of life is all about. So, hi, how you doing? Well, actually, I'm languishing. What does languishing mean? And how do we get round the languishing? You know what I'm talking about. It's that, I can't quite get round to the stuff I need to do. I can't quite get the energy up to be excited about any of the projects that I had before me in late 2019, early 2020, before the pandemic hit. Researchers have been out and about and found that anybody who really manifests sort of languishing symptoms, and my bet is that it's the majority of us after a year of sitting with multiple lockdowns, uncertainty, not knowing what's going on, work lives creaking, many people without work, family life disrupted, social life completely in tatters. We'll be finding getting down to work and plans for the future really problematic. That is languishing. There's a name for it. And in fact, the psychologists say, it's better. It's so much better, so much healthier for us to be able to acknowledge what's going on, to name it, to be honest with one another and name it and say, you know what? Hey, I'm not depressed. I'm not grieving, thankfully. No one close up has lost their life to COVID or to anything else recently, so I'm not in grief. However, I'm not flourishing, I am languishing. And to actually acknowledge that with one another and to say, hey, what to do. There's some bits and pieces that the psychologists are coming in to suggest ways forward. And so can I suggest, though I'm not a trained psychologist, though I've sat around enough conversations listening up to people's lives to know that one or two of these suggestions from psychologists are really, really useful, right? So let's pass them on, which is try and chunk up the challenges that you had in 2019 and are still relevant today in 2021, or the new ones that have emerged, because all of us have changed through this period. No one can come through COVID times without having had some of their perspective changed. Perhaps a sense of new connection with your neighbourhood, your community, local community. Perhaps through being part of communities like One Boat Chaplaincy, connecting in with a wider neighbourhood, our global neighbourhood, people who speak different languages, live in different continents, have an entirely altered different perspective on life, that you've been allowed some shards and rays of light in from. How wonderful that is. If COVID has done nothing but do that, well, thanks be to God for that. Although, let's also recognise the appalling cataclysm that COVID is for us. And thankfully that we can see a way through. But what are some of the simple things we can do with languishing? I'm going to give us a spot in from an example that my guru, if you like, Jesus used with his disciples when they found themselves in a tight spot. They'd gone out, they were outside the city, and they had 5,000 people plus who were tired and were hungry and were getting a little bit fractious. And they came to Jesus and said, Jesus, these people are hungry. They've got to have something to eat. What you got? What you got? And Jesus turned around to them and said, well, what have you got? What can you do? Focus. Don't put it out there. Focus. What can you do to do something about this situation? And so one of the things to do about languishing is to focus down. Also, we can reach out. Thank God we've got technology, so many of us. That is a gift for the Northern Hemisphere, and we have to push that further south, surely, in 2021, 2022 as we go forward. However, here we are, 2021. We can reach out in the Northern Hemisphere. We can reach out, make connections and say, hey, what can we do about this? And the disciples were a bit clueless and said, we've not got any money to go and there's no shops nearby. In fact, they're all probably closed. They're all probably locked down, right? And Jesus said, pay attention. Look what resources are to hand. And a little boy comes forward and says, hey, I've got 5 loaves and 2 fish. Any good? That reminds me of what has happened in the time of not only COVID, but climate emergency, right? Where Greta comes forward and goes, it's a climate emergency, folks. It's a climate emergency, politicians. It's a climate emergency, adults. Would you like to do something about it? I'm going to I'm going to write placards. I'm going to stand outside my school until somebody pays attention, right? She did what she could. She did what she could. And somehow it struck a light and a fire, and we have now a whole new world within 2 years of Greta sitting outside her school gate protesting. A whole change. Of course, it's worked in with other things. That's how it works. That is how the feeding of the 5,000 worked. It wasn't that boys, 2 fish, 5 loaves suddenly were exploded into being able to feed the 5,000. No, it triggered the ability of those who had food to share to start sharing. And you know what? After the feast had ended, there were 12 basketfuls of food remaining. Such was the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000. I want to say that I think the lesson of that speaks into our challenge of languishing and our challenge of what's going on in India even right now. At the moment in India, a third of a million people are being infected daily, and those are the ones that are being reported. And the deaths, they have no idea of the volume. We know it's at least 2,500 daily. We struggle to get our heads around these numbers. And one of the things about our globalised world, our world that is increasingly connected, we can hear by lunchtime what's been happening earlier on in the day in India, in Brazil, in Chile, in Argentina, in the Philippines, in Myanmar, not so much as in Russia or indeed in China, because the communication systems aren't flowing as smoothly into the Northern Hemisphere's connectivity. But we know, like we've never been able to know before, what's happening in our neighbour's patch, right? That too can bring a certain level of languishing. That sense of, I know that there is distress out there, but I don't know what I can do about it. One of the clues the psychologists give us to overcome languishing is to focus on some manageable stretch activities, something that's just that little bit away from us, a stretch, but it's not so bad that it's so monumental a task that we'd wreck our backs trying to achieve it. It's achievable, but it's a stretch. And you know, it's also a stretch, but with a bit of connection with others, we might really achieve a lot. And that's something we're trying to do. That's something we're trying to do through One Boat, is to create some sort of connection, some sort of ability to respond, to reply, when our brothers and sisters, who we are connected with, who reach out to us daily through the One Boat channel, to say, guys, can you help? Guys, you know, we're trying to feed here with no work at all, a community of 10 children who've been abandoned by their families. They can no longer feed them. Can you help? Or a colleague out up in Delhi says, Carrie, my family has run out of oxygen. We need $500 to help us access that oxygen. What do we do in the face of that? This is like the disciples coming to Jesus and saying, Master, we have no food. We've got 5,000 people at least, probably 10,000. They were only counting the heads of households, not the whole household. So, Master, what do we do about this problem. And Jesus goes, you go and find them something to eat. You go and find them something to eat. And the little boy came forward. So what can we do? I'd like you to think and come back to me. You can always chat, both in the comments and send messages as to what do we do, because these requests are coming in daily and we are connected. Our neighbour is no longer just the person down the street. Of course, those are our neighbours too. Our neighbours are citizens of the world. Let's pray. Eternal Spirit, Earth Maker, Pain Bearer, Life Giver, Source of all that is and that shall be, Father and Mother of us all, loving God in whom is heaven, the hallowing of your name echo through the universe, the way of your justice be followed by the peoples of the world. Your heavenly will be done by all created beings. Your commonwealth of peace and freedom sustain our hope and come on earth. With the bread that we need for today, feed us and help us share. In the hurts that we absorb from one another, forgive us. In times of temptation and test, strengthen us. From trials too great to endure, spare us. From the grip of all that is evil, free us. For you reign in the glory of the power that is love, now and forever. Amen. May your languishing be interrupted, given hope transformed by the love of God today and by your actions for change. And may you have a wonderful day. Lovely to see you all. Viv, Christy, gorgeous to see you. Take care.